Panelists, welcome. Well, we did sit in order of the tech stack. So we were joking in the green room, right? Like, to have this conversation on sustainability, scalability, and AI, we really need to bring up a group of panelists that are focused on the entire technology stack. So we were deciding, like, what is the tech stack? Should it be a pyramid? Would they, like, climb? Anyway, long story short. But we did actually, coincidentally, sit in that order. So you guys all remember Sharon from yesterday, but we have two new guests here, so I'll let Aparna and Noel introduce themselves, kind of their background, their companies, and why, for this conversation, we've brought kind of the view of the entire technology stack that delivers AI to have the conversation. So Aparna.
So hi, everyone. I'm Aparna Prabhakar. I lead strategy and sustainability for a $10 billion business within Schneider Electric, which is focused on data center and IT infrastructure. So we actually are everything outside of servers, the power distribution, the cooling, the UPS, which makes the heart of AI actually happen. And we were named the most sustainable company in the world by Times Magazine. So sustainability and how we do it right is heart of what we do at Schneider. So I'm very excited about having this conversation. Noel?
Thanks, Aparna. My name is Noel Keenan. I'm leading our AI Center of Excellence within Google Cloud Partnerships. I think you're aware of Google Cloud, just passed $40 billion in revenue, so fastest growing cloud. And Google as a AI-centric company, we're now seeing that flow into products. And I think amazing things happening in the industry all the way up the stack.
And Sharon, if you want to
Sure, I'll
remind everyone in case they were not paying attention yesterday.
Probably not.
I told her to bring more excitement.
The folks who stayed definitely were paying attention. No, I'm Sharon. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Lamini. We're an AI infrastructure company sitting on top of either some clouds or your on-premise GPUs. We enable people to develop models extremely efficiently with their developer teams that are very accurate. So very accurate and low-cost large language models.
So Sharon, maybe I'll start with you. This is a question you broached the subject yesterday. We didn't have time for the Q&A, so maybe kind of a transitional conversation. How should we think about, and sustainability is a pretty broad topic, right? So I think the rest of this morning, we're going to have a couple different versions of a sustainability, one really focusing on trusted AI. So we're not going to cover kind of the how do you build trust in deploying these technologies with your organizations. We're going to cover that later. So this is really focused on the AI ecosystem. But one of the things that comes up in the sustainability conversation is the concept of hallucinations. Didn't get a lot of time to unpack that yesterday. So how do you need to think about that, and how should organizations think about that as far as providing reliability to the outcomes in their enterprise?
Yeah, so connecting that to sustainability, I think sustainability is directly associated with cost. Essentially, like, how much power are you really using? And I think one of the big benefits that we have today is a lot of these open source models. So again, these are models that were created by Meta or Mistral or others that are very capable, right? That are starting to intersect with some of the big proprietary models and capabilities. But that's passing on savings in both huge costs, so billions of dollars in cost, and savings in energy and power, so that everyone can build on top of that platform. And what we do is we work with teams to take those big models and to adjust them so that they don't hallucinate on proprietary data. And to do that process is actually very cheap and fast. So that's really exciting, because then you can save all that money and just adjust it so that it is not hallucinating, that it's actually more of a last mile problem. And so that's how it all essentially connects back to the power element. So I think the big innovation here is around, okay, well, we have these huge models that are now shared by the entire ecosystem, and now we also have different technologies to extremely efficiently adjust them so that they actually can meet real business use cases.
Great. So Noel, maybe switch to you, and you think about chip manufacturing and kind of that balance that we have right now. Grok did a nice job kind of introducing the concept to us yesterday from a Google perspective. And again, we're not trying to get into like death matches here. As far as like supremacy of chip, but I know you guys are also thinking about this at Google. How are you thinking about that balance between, you know, the chips, you know, that the Moore's law of how good the chips are getting, but then also the massive power consumption that those chips need?
Yeah, so I think there's a few things that play together. You know, Google has been trying to make our data centers as sustainable and ecological as possible for years now, and I think we're on a really strong path to that. The metrics are there. We also have things, you know, as simple as in Google Cloud Console, you can see your CO2 impact and sort of all the energy that you're consuming based on your region, based on the consumption you had. So that kind of metric becomes super important. Then, of course, coming to the chips, we have our own TPUs and the best, but obviously we always want to take the best, the most power efficient, the best for our customers. At the end, you know, our customers are king. That's what we're listening to. We believe from a TPU perspective, we're particularly on the training side, really making something that is incredibly efficient and economical. And then, you know, we can get into the models probably a little bit later, but I do see a change in the market as it comes to things like distillation, actually having smaller models that work really, really well at answering questions you have within certain use cases. So I think there has been the impression in the market, let's always take the best for what we have. Like, let's take the biggest model because that's going to answer the best. I think that's great for POC. We'll get to the point where people understand you need the smallest model that is the lowest latency, that's the cheapest, that's the most power efficient to answer your particular question. So I think all the way through from the infrastructure to actually the end piece of models, we're looking for the best solutions and the most efficient.
Yeah. So I chuckled a bit because at KPMG, I have access to probably 5, 6 different LLMs. And you know, even I always choose, like, and you get to choose which one. So my CTO, Matt, put your earmuffs on. I always choose the most sophisticated model for any task, but I probably need to get better at that. And I don't think people think about that necessarily, right? So maybe as a quick follow-up, are you starting to get this concept? Are your customers starting to ask? Are they starting to think about this? Are they starting to think about like fit for purpose?
So it's a journey. So I think everybody starts with the POC, and they start in exactly the same way as you just said. You take the absolute best. Yeah. You're like, hey, great, we got it working and giving the answers you want. And then you figure out, well, maybe the latency is too high, or, oh, this is actually going to cost a little bit, as you sort of do the math on how that multiplies out. So getting into production, there's a lot of things that's a whole separate discussion of going from POC to production. But customers are starting to understand we need to be mindful. We actually, in a single use case, might use 5 or 6 different models for different pieces of that. You know, something that's really good just specifically at putting natural language to SQL. And we have another piece that retrieves information, those sort of RAG components. So customers are beginning to understand there's complexity there, but that complexity gives you choice and gives you efficiencies.
That's great. Aparna, maybe the similar question to you. I think the conversation around sustainability specific to AI and how it intersects with a broader ESG agenda has certainly evolved over the last 5 years, right? I think early days it was much more focused on a lot of the social impact, specifically workforce impact, and we will talk about that in one of the next panels. But as we're starting to see more and more consumption, more and more energy consumption, right? Like that's really what Schneider is known for, right? Like how are you guys thinking about sustainability within your organization, or even how you can help the conversation with the folks in this room?
I think the first thing to start with is I want to lay out some facts. By 2027, it's projected that we'll have 50 gigawatts of data center build happening. That's massive. And when you think about it, and you think about how hot the servers in that gigawatt build is going to be, that's huge. And that's very much dictated by how you build on your foundational models, how efficient those chips are, but also how you surround it. And I like to think about sustainability as a collective noun. So as you think about your stack, it's responsibility for every single person to make that shift. And that's where I think that's what we are doing. One piece is a big part of my agenda is as we are building our new product lines, how do we make sure it's most efficient? How do we make sure I'm actually getting to that net zero footprint within my product lines, which are extremely important? Then we use that, and by the way, Google is a partner of ours, so are the other internet giants, and we're working with them on their net zero agenda. And then we are working with our supply chain, which goes to the electricians, which goes to those people who don't think about sustainability and educating them in this process. And that's work, because honestly, when you think about it, it feels like a big term, and you need to make it real. And that's how we are making it real, from how do you think about AI? How do you deal with the paradox of AI? It brings a lot of productivity, but it's also really power hungry. And the fact of it remains that our energy envelope is exactly the same, even as we are growing. And that's why what we are all doing becomes extremely important, and how we do it becomes extremely important.
So one of the things we hear a lot about is the power consumption required, right? And I think your point there on, well, how do we figure out how we can be neutral in delivering the compute, but are we going to be able to be neutral, or is it going to, you hear the statistics, we have some folks that are kind of on the other, probably need to have a chair right here in between to have that part of the conversation. But do you think there is going to be that element of staying neutral, or is it really going to be that much more power consumption required, and what's the impact to the grid? Or different counties, jurisdictions, et cetera. That came up a bit yesterday.
We had I was having a lunch discussion yesterday with somebody who was basically saying, hey, we are going to go to this power neutral world. And I had to say, hold on a second. We are diversifying our grid. Yes, AI is happening, but we are also, hey, I have EV cars, right? So I'm also demanding more of grid from the other elements. So it's not just AI, it's as we are getting more digital, we are actually putting more demands on our grid itself. And as we are bringing renewable sources in, the grid is becoming really unstable. So yes, that's the ultimate aim, where the amount of energy which you're using is going to get net neutral. But remember, AI is one form of compute. Later on the day, you'll have quantum, and that was my old world. Quantum is going to be there in future as well, and that will have different energy demands. So we have to plan for it. I mean, we have to figure out how do we manage in that envelope, and is the energy going to be the limiting factor for our growth? And that's a big question. That's a TBD, by the way. I don't know the answer to that, but that's a question we all have to think about.
So maybe going back, Sharon, to you, one of the ways, obviously, you can combat, or not combat, but kind of stay neutral, is actually in the efficiency of the models, right? And I think you talked a little bit about that yesterday. Maybe go a little bit further on, what can some of the folks in this room do or bring back to their organizations to help think about strategies to drive some of that efficiency, so that they're not kind of coming this way down the stack, putting those strains or constraint on our ability to scale?
Well, yeah, first, almost stepping back, like why is this so important? Why are people continuing to consume more power for artificial intelligence? It's because of scaling laws. And what scaling laws state is that compute plus data equals intelligence. And there turns out to be kind of a formula for it. And if you pour more data and you pour more compute, you're going to get more intelligence out. And as long as that intelligence grows, it's on a log scale, but as long as we see more returns on that intelligence, people are going to pour more money onto compute and data to get models at a greater scale. And that's why we see these larger and larger models that can handle more and more data. And so that's why there's so much demand on the power side, right, for these models, because they're so large to train. So that's why it's so strained. And so how do you address the efficiency issue? I actually think we're in an interesting moment where you can actually see this almost false dichotomy between a large model versus a small model. And I say this, and I'm going to give some real examples of different models, and then I'll extrapolate into what I think the future will look like for this. But Currently, there's a type of model called a mixture of experts that hints at this. A mixture of experts model, GPT-4 is based on this, or rumored to be, but it is. Mixtral is famously known for this as well. But essentially, it's like the brain, it has 8 experts, so it's a mixture of 8 experts. And when you ask it a question, only one of the experts responds. So if you're saying like, hi, how are you doing? Only an eighth of the brain of the AI responds, not the entire brain of the AI. So it's much more efficient in giving you a response. If you're asking for a doctor's diagnosis, maybe a different expert comes in because it's better at that, and it responds. And so this is exciting because you can essentially imagine you're getting a bigger brain, so you're getting that bigger model, but for the cost and latency speed, essentially, of that smaller model. And taken to the extreme, and so probably the most extreme case that we've taken it to is instead of 8 experts, do 1 million experts. So like turn any model into a mixture of experts model and do millions of experts, right? And so as you can imagine, as this scales, you can get a huge model. You can get a model that is 400 billion parameters large, but it is at the cost, latency, speed, and efficiency of a tiny 8 billion parameter model. That is really, really attractive because then you can get the intelligence of a larger model with the cost and all the sustainable pieces around it of a smaller model. So that's just how I would think about it, that I think that's where the future is going with these types of things.
So Noel, maybe back to you, similar question. How are you guys thinking about driving kind of that efficiency kind of through the Google stack?
So I really love the mixture of experts piece. Our Gemini model is based on that, and that's how we're able to get to 2 million token context window, which is sort of pretty unique in the industry. So kind of blows up a lot of things around retrieval augmented generation and how you build use cases. I would say on the sustainability side, when it comes to customers, and I think this is some education and a call to action maybe for our KPMG partner, in discussions with customers, you have the discussion like we need to train a model on our data. And that means, you're going to need 100,000 GPUs and you're going to need to fully fine tune and basically build a foundation model from scratch. And, when you have the second and third conversation, you're like, okay, so you really had 100 documents that you wanted to read through, and maybe we don't need to go back to scratch and use all of this power. You can use an open source model, you can use our models. There's actually other ways to do that. So I think there's a baseline of who needs to actually build these foundational models, what level of tuning and training is needed on those models to get the outputs that they want. So I think there's a sort of an education in the ecosystem and a change in the ecosystem to understand who's actually going to build those. And I think that's a sort of an equation that is still not fully met in terms of reducing the power that's required. Everybody does not need to train their own model with small options on top of, again, that's not a promotion of Google models. It can be Llama, it can be Mistral, it can be whatever model you want to use and to tweak and tune on top of that. So I think there's huge pieces associated with that, and then you get into distillation and other things and mixture of experts, as you say, to really make that more efficient. The R&D of this is still, really moving at pace that I have not seen for a very long time. So our goal, we're at 2 million token context window. Our goal is to get to infinite context window. And that comes back to these kind of changes in the models that you're getting to really small models, and again, super energy efficient. So I think there's a lot of research coming and changes in models that are also going to change the equation of what you need, what energy is being used for these models, even what the inference looks like, getting to the right use case output.
I still can't get my head around infinite context, but maybe someday I'll get there. We started to get there last night as we were exploring humanity, but I left before they probably solved that one. Looks like we're at that session. So that's I think a good point. And you started to hit on the open source element of this, right? So maybe talk about, I guess, anyone who wants to jump in here. How should we be thinking about combination of models? How's open source models going to kind of impact the sustainability longer term, right? Show of hands, like how many that are representing a company that is deploying AI, are you thinking about deploying your own LLM, like you need to build your own, or you want to fine tune? Okay, so a few, right? So I think I've seen that definitely. That's been a change, right? In the last 12 months, the initial reaction was, okay, I need to go build my own models. And it's like, well, what are you trying to do? And then the reality is, you don't. You can use other models, and there are other techniques on top of it to bring your corporate insights to action. I don't think the conversations haven't stalled because of the sustainability of that. It's been more of the cost benefit, right? But I think sustainability could come into it. But I guess, how does open source models, how does that fit into the equation?
Sure, I'll take this. So we have customers who are both, just fine-tuning and customers, so fine-tuning open source models, and others who are doing a combination of pre-training their own foundation models and then doing fine-tuning on top. And I would say there's a very obvious divide between the two. I would say those who want to pre-train their own models are usually in a certain domain where, English prose might not be helpful at all. And so they need some customization there. And those who are fine-tuning are saying, well, that actually is useful to me as something, being able to have those base language layers is super useful to me. And then I think that's what it looks like today. What I think it looks like tomorrow is I actually think a lot more people will have their own models, but it won't be from investing $1 billion upfront with an elite AI team doing so. I think it's going to be more like, and bear with me here, have people heard of the myth of Theseus? So it's this Greek myth, yes, Theseus' ship. Basically, he has his ship, and it's a philosophical question. As you replace the wood boards, at what point is it still Theseus' ship, right? And I think the same thing is true with these models when you edit it with so much of your own data over time, which is small investments over time, but they do add up. And so my belief is that that's what it'll look like moving forward, and that you can actually get your own model, own foundation model, and it will be dramatically different from the Llama model. And what we see already is people who fine-tune with even modest amounts of data, maybe modest to large amounts of data. It doesn't even matter what base model you're choosing. So for a code application, one of our customers has, they're like, well, we tested Llama, the spec with Llama 3 and Code Llama, and we got the same results. It didn't matter that one of the base models knew a little bit more about code. We had so much code that it didn't matter. And it was around, honestly, I think it was around tens of thousands of data points, so it wasn't even massive for them. So they're like, okay, well, it almost doesn't matter what was at the base. So I thought that was really interesting. And I think the myth of Theseus might actually play out for these models long term.
Can I add
Please.
one more thing to that? I think as you're thinking about how you use open source models, one question is, where do you actually deploy some of this? And I know it's an age-old conversation of what's on cloud, what's on-prem, and that is an ongoing conversation irrespective of AI. But if you're going to deploy it on-prem for whatever reason, security, resilience, et cetera, it's good time to actually go and say, do I want to upgrade my micro data center? Do I want to think about more efficient infrastructure? Because even with inference, by the way, we are having this discussion, is with inference, is it going to be accelerated? Is it going to have those GPUs or not? Depends on the workloads. Because your workloads are going to be mixed. You're going to have accelerated workloads and you're going to have CPU workloads all working together. That does mean that as you're thinking about how you deploy it, you need to think about what goes into cloud, but what do I need to put on my on-prem, and do I need to upgrade it? And that's a conversation to have today, and it's an important conversation. Today morning, we spoke about how security is a big portion of what we have to think about, and this is connected to sustainability and security, and that's a AI conversation today.
So Aparna, maybe a quick follow-up to that. Given your role and Schneider and how they're thinking about it, what should this room take back to start having? I'm assuming those conversations around corporate responsibility and the intersection of sustainability as we start to scale AI. How should they be thinking about that? How are you guys thinking about it?
It's a really good question. Like, this is an age-old question, right? How do you measure growth? And we always measured growth with GDP. And that becomes really hard because you're basically saying, how do I grow my revenue? And when we start talking about TCOs, we're really talking about how do I enable cost savings. But now we have to start talking about, if I do definitely think maybe it's not going to be a problem in the next 5 years, maybe not 10 years, but over the next 5 years, you're going to have an energy issue. How do I think about my energy and the availability of energy as a part of my TCO discussion? And that's what we are trying to bring into our own equation. Then second thing, before you start building new things, go in and optimize what you already have to some extent. So you clean up what you have and then add capabilities on top of it. It makes it much more efficient, much more sustainable, because you have a lot of unknown unknowns, right? I'll give you a good example. Sorry, I'm going a little bit over, but I think it's very relevant. So Microsoft has its net zero 2030. They just gave their 2030 sustainability agenda out. They are about 30% off from their target. Why? Because as they are building more data centers, and this is true for any internet giants, they are realizing they don't have enough levers to pull to make it more sustainable. So to get to the goals we've set as a community for 2030, we actually have to innovate. And that means innovation in software, it means innovation at our application level, and it means innovation at our infrastructure level. And that's what I want you to take away, is that irrespective of where you are on stack, you have a role to play here. And that's what you have to start thinking. It shouldn't be an afterthought, and it should be a primary thought as we go in.
That is a great way to close this out. I know we're at time. I'm going to indulge myself, though. I have a quick question, speed round. When you think about being a leader, it's managing through constraints. So in the next 5 years, what is the biggest constraint that has you concerned about scaling AI? Is it energy, access to chips, or knowledge and expertise?
Sharon.
Sharon, go.
Wow, how do you, is there all of the above?
No. Constraints, it's a thing.
My goodness. For my company or for
Just in general,
customers?
the general AI landscape.
Oh, the general AI landscape, I think demand for compute will still be pretty heavy.
Okay.
I think ease of use will come down so that more people can actually access and play with this technology. Already seeing that now. And yeah, that's
Okay.
that's
Noel?
my prediction.
I think the medium-term knowledge is still,
Yeah.
I think, really critical. The kind of 5 years out, you know, I'm confident we'll invent our way out of all the constraints. We'll be fine.
Parna?
Okay, I said this before, but power availability. So I have taken 50 gigawatts of data center, and I've taken utility, what they have said, where they're going to be building, mapped it out, they don't match. And we're trying to figure out, oh my God, they don't match. So how are we putting plans together for 50 gigawatts of data center build? And that, to me, is a big problem.
Awesome. All right, well, I'm going to conclude it here or I'll lose my job. We're going to take a quick break. Please thank the panel. So Sharon, Noel, Aparna, thank you very much.